On Mother's Day, I was handed a card and my daughter asked me to read it out loud in front of everyone. The poem inside started sweetly but quickly turned cruel, saying in a hurtful way that I was unwanted, and the room filled with awkward laughter that cut straight through my heart. My name is Grace, I'm 74 years old, and that moment became one of the most painful memories I've ever had. It was a bright Sunday morning with sunlight pouring through the windows when I arrived at my daughter Danielle's home to celebrate the day. I was wearing my favorite green dress, the one that always made me feel graceful and confident, and I had brought flowers and small treats for the children. My youngest grandchild ran to me shouting my name, and their warm hugs made me smile, making everything feel right for a short while. But that feeling didn't last long because my son-in-law Michael only gave me a cold nod, and Danielle greeted me with a smile that felt forced. She told me they had a special surprise waiting, and as I sat down on the sofa with my family around me, I had no idea how quickly this happy day would turn into something I would never forget. The grandchildren sat close to my feet, buzzing with excitement, while Danielle reached into her purse and pulled out a pink card, saying it was from everyone and that I should read it out loud. My fingers shook a little as I opened it and saw small flower drawings the kids had made, which made me smile and think it was something thoughtful and kind. I began reading in a cheerful voice, but after the first line, my voice suddenly faltered because the message changed into words that made it clear I was not truly welcome and that they thought I no longer belonged. For a few long seconds, the room felt frozen and painfully quiet, and then Michael broke into loud laughter, followed by Danielle trying to hide her own amusement. Even the children started to laugh, not really understanding what was happening, only copying the adults. Danielle joked about my reaction and teased Michael about it, and in that moment, it felt like something inside me quietly broke, because I realized the card was never meant to be a kind surprise at all. Tears started sliding down my tired cheeks, and the card slipped from my shaking hands onto the floor as I sat there in shock. Danielle quickly said it was only a joke and told me not to take it so seriously, but her voice had no kindness in it, only impatience, and she even blamed me for being too sensitive. Michael picked up the card and tried to brush it off, saying they were just teasing, but then he awkwardly added that I had been around a little too much lately and should think about making a change. When I asked what he meant, Danielle sat in front of me and explained that there were nice places for older people where I could live with others my age and be more comfortable. Those words echoed in my head like a final goodbye, and it suddenly felt like my own family wanted to push me aside as if I no longer mattered. I tried to remind them that I thought we were supposed to be celebrating together, but Michael cut in, saying it was time to face reality, that I wasn't young anymore, and that they had their own lives to live. The grandchildren stared at me with confused faces, and the oldest, who was only about 8, walked over and gently took my hand, asking why I was crying. Before I could even explain, Danielle pulled him away and told him not to worry, saying I was fine and just being emotional. Sitting there, I felt more lonely than I ever had before, especially on a day that was meant to honor me as a mother, yet my own daughter had turned me into a joke in front of everyone. With shaky legs, I slowly stood up and said I should leave, and Danielle didn't even bother to get up, only saying they would call me later. I walked out with what little pride I had left, but inside, everything felt broken. That night, alone in my quiet house, I cried until I had nothing left, but somewhere in that pain, something inside me changed. The shame had stirred a strength I had forgotten I had, and I knew it was time for my family to see who I truly was. The next day I cut off all contact, and then, sitting in my favorite chair where I once held Danielle as a baby, I let my memories slowly come back to me like scenes from an old film. My story really began when I was 29, after Danielle's father walked out on us when she was only 3 years old. One morning he was simply gone, leaving behind a short note on the kitchen table saying he couldn't handle that life anymore, without even saying goodbye to his little girl. I still remember holding Danielle that night while she cried and asked where her father was, and I softly told her he had gone far away, while quietly promising myself she would never lack anything. I kept that promise by working long double shifts at a textile factory for many years, my hands growing rough and sore from sewing late into the night. Every extra bit of money I saved went toward her future, and when she was 17 and dreamed of becoming a nurse, I sold the only valuable thing I had, my mother's jewelry, without thinking twice. Even during her years at university, I kept working weekends cleaning offices, coming home exhausted and in pain, but always believing it was worth it for her future. Whenever I saw Danielle sitting at the dining table with her books spread out, all the years of hard work felt completely worth it. The day she graduated, I cried with pride as she hugged me and said we had done it together and that she couldn't have made it without me. Not long after, she met Michael, and at first I truly liked him because he seemed kind, serious about his work, and devoted to her. When they decided to get married, I paid for half of the wedding, using $12,000 I had saved over many years, because I wanted her to have the day she had always dreamed of. She tried to refuse the money, but I insisted, telling her she deserved it. Later, when they bought their first house, I gave them $25,000 for the down payment, which was everything I had, but seeing their happiness made it feel like the right choice. Then the grandchildren were born, two wonderful little souls who became the center of my world. And when Danielle went back to work, I took care of them every day, walking 6 blocks to their home at dawn for 3 years without missing a day. I took care of everything for the children, from making their breakfast and getting them dressed to taking them outside, feeding them, bathing them, and reading them stories before bed. By the time Danielle came home from work, the house was always in order and the kids were smiling, and she used to tell me how grateful she was and call me her angel. But slowly things began to change in a way I didn't notice at first. The thank you words became rare, and my thoughts about the children started to be treated like unwanted advice. When I once suggested that the youngest should see a doctor because of a long-lasting cough, Michael snapped at me and reminded me that they were the parents, and I stayed quiet, thinking maybe I had overstepped. After that, small remarks kept coming, saying I was too tired or making mistakes and hinting that I should stay home more, but I kept showing up and doing my best anyway. Even 2 years ago, when Michael lost his job, I began giving them $500 every month so they wouldn't lose their house, telling myself it was only for a short while. That I told myself it was just temporary, only until Michael found a better job. 6 months later he did, but they never asked me to stop sending the money. They just continued accepting it as if it were their right. When the kids needed new computers for school, I quietly paid $2,000. When Danielle's car broke down, I gave them $4,000 for repairs. Later, when they decided to remodel the kitchen, I contributed $8,000 without hesitation. Gradually, I became the silent supporter, always solving their financial problems, yet completely left out of the family's important decisions. About a year ago, Danielle organized a dinner for Michael's birthday, and I only found out by accident when one of the grandkids mentioned it. I called her, asking why I hadn't been invited, and she brushed it off, saying it was just a small thing, and that I would have been bored. But the photos online told a different story. 20 people, including Michael's relatives I knew well, had attended, and I was the only one left out. That night, I cried quietly, convincing myself it must have been a simple mistake, but those mistakes kept happening. They forgot my birthday, canceled our lunches, and whenever I showed up unannounced, I could feel their irritation as if I was a burden. The breaking point came 3 months ago while I was at their house helping prepare dinner, when I accidentally overheard Michael talking on the phone outside. He was calmly telling someone that his mother-in-law lived alone, was becoming too dependent, and that they were already looking into places to move me to, as if I were some problem that needed to be removed. I stood frozen behind the door, realizing he was planning to push me out of their lives like unwanted old furniture. That night, sleep wouldn't come because it finally hit me that after giving them my time, my savings, and my love, I was now seen as nothing more than an inconvenience. But what they didn't know was that I had a secret I had kept for many years. Before she passed away, my mother told me about a family property in Nassau in the Bahamas that became mine when I turned 70. A small beachfront home that had been rented out for decades, with all the income quietly building up in an account I never used. On top of that, I had made careful investments with the inheritance from my Aunt Lucille, who left everything to me, and while I lived simply on my small monthly check, that money had been steadily growing in the background. Altogether, I had nearly $400,000 that my family knew nothing about. They believed I was just an old woman getting by on a small government check, never realizing that for years I had been quietly helping pay for their comfortable life, not because I had to, but because I loved them. But after the humiliation I went through on Mother's Day, something inside me changed for good, and I knew it was time for them to understand my real worth. That cruel card became my wake-up call. I stayed awake all night holding it in my shaking hands, and those hurtful words kept repeating in my mind, telling me I was unwanted. When the tears finally stopped, a strange calm took their place, along with a new sense of strength and clear thinking. For the first time in many years, I looked at my life honestly and realized I was not a burden at all. I was the one holding everything together. I went to my bedroom, took out a small wooden box from my dresser, and opened it to find all my important papers. And as I went through the numbers in my head, I was stunned by what I saw in the past 5 years. I had quietly given Danielle and Michael a total of $67,000. They accepted every penny as if it were theirs by right, while treating me worse and worse over time. The down payment on their house was $25,000, the wedding $12,000, monthly support over 2 years added another $12,000, plus $2,000 for the kids' computers, $4,000 for car repairs, $8,000 for the kitchen remodel, and hundreds of smaller expenses that totaled around $4,000 more. All the while, I continued living in my modest home, wearing the same green dress on Sundays, walking to the store to save a little money, never asking for anything in return. But what really cut me to the bone wasn't the money, it was how their attitude toward me had changed. I thought of my oldest grandson's birthday 6 months ago. I had arrived early to help decorate like I always did, but when I knocked, Michael answered the door with irritation. "Grace, the party doesn't start until 3. Why are you so early?" he asked. I smiled and explained that I just wanted to help with the preparations, but his annoyed expression made me feel invisible in the family I had sacrificed so much for. "We don't need any help. Danielle has it all under control," Michael said sharply. Behind him, I saw his mother, Brenda, hanging balloons in the living room. She had been invited to help, while I was treated like an unwelcome guest. "I can wait outside until 3, I muttered quietly, feeling the sting of humiliation. Danielle appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and said, "Don't be dramatic, Mom. You can stay, but don't get in the kitchen. You always get confused with the recipes." Me, someone who had cooked for that family for decades, being told I might get confused. That day, I sat alone on the patio like a stranger at my own grandson's party, watching Brenda receive compliments on the food she had helped prepare, while I, who had paid for half the party, was completely ignored. When it came time to sing happy birthday, I stayed at the back as everyone formed a circle around my grandson, unnoticed in the photos. Later, as I quietly picked up some dirty plates, my grandson came to me and asked, "Grandma, why were you so quiet today?" I forced a smile and whispered, "I was just tired, my love," hiding the hurt I felt deep inside. Grandma Brenda's words still echoed in my mind, "You're too old for big parties." Even though she was only 3 years younger than me, she was telling my own grandchildren that I was past my prime, and the sting of it cut deep. Yet even after that, I kept giving money, helping in every way I could, and holding on to hope that things would improve. How foolish I had been. I also remembered last Christmas, when I had spent nearly $3,000 on thoughtful gifts. A new bicycle for my oldest grandson, a tablet for the youngest, French perfume for Danielle, and a power tool Michael had mentioned wanting. On Christmas Eve, I arrived with my arms full of beautifully wrapped presents, and the kids ran to greet me full of excitement, but Danielle quickly called them over. "Kids, put Grandma's presents under the tree with the others. We'll open them all together tomorrow," she said. My carefully chosen gifts got lost in the mountain of packages they had bought themselves. When the presents were finally opened, no one even acknowledged who had given what. The children thanked everyone vaguely, but the part that hurt the most was when I handed Danielle a special gift. A pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, a cherished family heirloom full of history and love. "Mom, it's really pretty," Danielle said casually, not even trying the necklace on. "But I don't wear much jewelry. Maybe save it for when the grandkids are older." She handed the box back to me without opening it or looking at the pearls closely. I had dreamed of that moment for months, imagining my daughter wearing the same pearls that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in our family. That night, sitting alone in my quiet house, I hugged the little box and cried. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the complete lack of care for something I had given with all my heart. But the final blow came just 2 months ago when I caught the flu. I was bedridden for a week with a high fever of 102 degrees, unable to cook or even make it to the bathroom without help. I called Danielle, hoping she might check on me or bring a little food, and her response shocked me. "Oh, Mom, we're so busy right now. Michael has a big project and I'm on a double shift at the hospital. Can't you ask a neighbor?" I told her I could barely walk. She replied coldly, "Mom, you're not a little girl anymore. You have to take care of yourself. We can't run over every time you get a cold." A cold. My body burning with fever, and that's all it was to them. She hung up and didn't call back for the entire week. It was Mrs. Johnson, my 82-year-old neighbor, who brought me homemade soup and made sure I took my medicine. A woman I barely knew showing more concern than my own daughter. When I finally recovered and went back to my usual visits with the family, no one even asked how I had been, as if that miserable week had never happened. Sitting there with my bank documents spread out before me, I finally saw the truth about my place in their lives. I wasn't a cherished grandmother. I was the emotional ATM. When they needed money, there was grace. When they needed a free babysitter, there was grace. When they needed someone to blame for their frustrations, there was grace. But when Grace needed love, care, respect, or even a simple call during a serious illness, Grace didn't exist. That night, I made the toughest decision of my life. I opened my old laptop and logged into my online banking for the first time in months, determined to take control. First, I canceled the automatic $500 monthly transfer to Danielle's account. Next, I closed the joint savings account we had set up for family emergencies, which only they had been using. Finally, I updated my will. Everything I had once planned for Danielle and Michael would now be redirected to a foundation for abandoned seniors. And then I did something I never imagined I would. I bought a plane ticket. It was time to see the property in Nassau I had inherited and to begin the life I truly deserved. But before I left, I wanted my family to understand exactly what they had lost. On Tuesday morning, I put my plan into action. I had only slept 3 hours, yet for the first time in years I felt fully awake, focused, and determined. I dressed in my most elegant gray suit, the one I had bought for Danielle's university graduation but hardly ever worn, styled my hair in a neat, sophisticated bun, and applied my makeup carefully. I wanted to present myself as the strong, capable woman I truly was, not the helpless old lady they assumed me to be. My first stop was the bank, where my financial advisor, Mr. Henderson, looked surprised to see me so early. "Mrs. Grace, how can I help you today?" he asked. I spoke firmly. "I need to make several important changes to my accounts." Over the next 2 hours, I completely reorganized my finances. I canceled all automatic transfers to Danielle's accounts, closed the joint account we had set up 3 years ago, and moved money from my investments into my main checking account. "Are you sure about these changes, ma'am?" Mr. Henderson asked, clearly concerned. "These are very significant moves." "Completely sure," I said firmly. "It's my money and I can decide how to use it." Next, I went to my lawyer, Mr. Franklin, who had managed my family's legal matters for decades. Without any small talk, I announced, "I need to completely change my will." Mr. Franklin, an older man who had known me since Danielle was a child, removed his glasses and looked at me with concern. "Grace, is everything all right? This is a very drastic change." I met his gaze and said, "Everything is perfectly fine. For the first time in years, I see things clearly." I laid out my decisions. Everything I had once planned for Danielle and Michael would now go to a foundation for homeless seniors, and I also created a trust for my grandchildren that they could only access when they turned 25, and only if they maintained a genuine relationship with me, not out of obligation. Mr. Franklin hesitated. "Grace, don't you want to think about it a few more days? These are irreversible decisions." I smiled calmly. "I've had 74 years to think, and the last 5 have taught me everything I needed to know." With a steady hand, I signed the documents without a trace of doubt. My next stop was the travel agency. I had spent the night researching my Nassau property, a lovely 3-bedroom condo in a beautiful neighborhood, ready to begin the next chapter of my life. The condo had been rented for years by a property management company, steadily generating income that sat untouched in a Bahamian account I had never touched. "I want to fly to Nassau this Friday," I told the travel agent. "Is this a tourist trip, ma'am?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "This is a liberation trip. I bought a first-class ticket. If I was starting my new life, I was going to do it in style." But before I left, there was one final task: the letters. I got home at noon, sat at my desk, and took out the elegant letterhead I had purchased years ago but never used. It was time to explain everything to my family, clearly and firmly. The first letter was for Danielle. "My dearest daughter," I wrote, "by the time you read this, I will be on my way to Nassau, where I will live in the property I inherited from our family, something you never knew existed. I have made the decision to end all financial support I've given you over the past few years. The $500 monthly transfer has been permanently canceled, and the joint account you used for emergencies has been closed. This is not meant as punishment but as a lesson in independence. Something I should have taught you a long time ago. Asterisk, for decades I gave you everything I had, my time, my money, my energy, and my unconditional love. But somewhere along the way you stopped seeing me as your mother and began seeing me as a burden, a personal maid, and a private bank. The cruel Mother's Day card was only the final straw, but the hurt had been building for years. I have changed my will. My inheritance will now go to people who truly value generosity and family love. Your children can access a trust only when they turn 25, and only if they show they can maintain a genuine relationship with me. Do not come to me for money. Do not call to ask me to return. Do not send the grandkids to guilt or manipulate me. If you want your mother back in your life, you will have to show that you value me for who I am, not for what I can provide. Signed, your mother, Grace, who has finally learned her own worth. The second letter was for Michael. Asterisk, Michael, I never saw you as just a son-in-law. I welcomed you as the son I never had, yet you turned me into the awkward mother-in-law you wanted to discard. I overheard your phone call 3 months ago when you spoke about moving me to a proper place as if I were old furniture. What you didn't realize is that a proper place was already in my hands. I own a property in Nassau, investments that generate more income than you make in a year, and the freedom to live wherever and however I wish. For years, I quietly supported your comfortable lifestyle, paying for repairs, helping with expenses, covering emergencies, all out of love, never obligation. Asterisk, but you mistook my generosity for weakness, my constant presence for dependence, and my love for a nuisance. Now it was time for you to stand on your own. Once I finished the letters, I slipped them into an envelope and left it on the coffee table, knowing they would find it soon. Then I sat back in my living room, a quiet smile spreading across my face. It had taken me 74 years, but I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. You teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept. For decades, I had settled for scraps of love because I feared being alone. But being alone, I realized, was far better than being surrounded by people who didn't respect me. And now, having understood that, I wasn't truly alone at all. I was free. I was heading to Nassau, and for the first time in many, many years, I felt a thrill of excitement for the life that was finally mine.